Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Method Ministries, and I'm here again. If you remember, this is the second appearance that I'm happy to have Pastor Jeffrey Rickman. He's a global Methodist pastor, as well as he has an awesome podcast, Plainspoken, and he's been given a lot of commentary on the general conference that just took place. So we're going to talk about it, and I want him to give us basically like a review so we can be caught up with what's going on. So thanks again for being here. And you might have just heard my daughter in the background, by the way.
My kids will be around the corner as well. So glad to be with you, brother.
Yeah, same. Did I get that right? With the intro, like anything else, you want to add for your introduction?
No, that was great.
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah. So I've been watching you a lot on like your live commentary. It seems like every time I looked on your page, you were going live, talking about or just giving commentary on the general conference. So like you have a lot of patience because you were just like, man, like every time I looked, like you were just giving commentary and going live and everything. And I could tell that you helped a lot of people because a lot of people were tuning into this as well. And
by the last day, we had over 800 people on there for a long period of time, which in Methodist terms is there were a couple of times where I almost had more people on my live stream restreaming the general conference than were on the actual general conference stream, which is quite a thing. I felt good about that. I think that made a statement about what people need in order to properly appreciate and understand what's going on in those settings.
Yes.
It is intimidating.
Yeah, and you're the only Methodist podcaster, to my knowledge, that I know that was giving commentary like that. So, like, I really appreciate you and what you're doing. And as we talk to offline, through conversations, I wish we would get more Methodist podcasters out there because they don't really tend to do that. I've been finding some more on YouTube and everything. So, like, I'm happy for your page and or your podcast and everything.
Yeah, the Methodists have not had a very significant online presence, and I've sent you a spreadsheet that I have with the ones that I know about. Yeah. And there are some that have more subscribers than me and you, but they don't put out much content. They don't do much engagement with the culture. It's usually more theological, and it's not real in the nitty gritty. So you'll find people in the Roman Catholic sphere or the Catholic sphere that really engage very critically with other thinkers and have the time and the energy to articulate a lot of nuanced doctrine. And I can't think of anybody who does that well in the Methodist world. And that's kind of the area, I don't know if you've seen the stuff I've done with my buddy TJ and my friend Robbie, but we'll kind of pick things apart theologically, look at developments in the culture and say what's right and what's wrong about it, talk about the Bible. And I think that sort of stuff really needs to be done for Methodists in order for us to reclaim our doctrinal heritage.
Yeah, because like I heard, from several people that Methodists are kind of caught in their own like a bubble, and in a lot of infighting and everything. And watching the general conference, I kind of felt like that too. Like I was very focused on it at some points, and even online, like some of my like engagements with people who are UMCers and everything. Like I guess it is easy for if you look at this divide that's just taken place, it's easy to understand. Okay, that's why they kind of just have not really been reaching out and like doing like like podcasting and like online presence, because they're infighting, and this is pretty big battles that's going on and taking place.
Well, within just almost any tribe now, there's a good deal of infighting, and so podcasting and live streaming, this online presence, is a way of not just articulating a theological tradition, but fighting for that theological tradition and the way in which it is understood publicly, but also doing some kind of like gatekeeping inside as well, because that's the part that's been really weak inside Methodism, is there hasn't been gatekeeping for a long time. The United Methodist Church for a long time has had kind of a monopoly on the Methodist brand, and they created this notion of a big tent that was just so destructive, allowed people to believe just whatever they wanted and be considered a Methodist anyway. And that's just a great way to destroy your brand and to make sure that your doctrine doesn't mean much, because it's optional. Yeah. And so that's what we've really lacked. Is you'll find a lot of people that are kind of winsome, and they'll put forward some understandings of the Methodist tradition that are pretty hard to disagree with, but also you don't need Methodism to do those things. You don't have a lot of happy warriors that are engaging critically with other thinkers and going, well, that's fine for you maybe, but here's what Methodism does, and here's why it's better, and here's why more people should be Methodist. And I think until you're willing to engage on those terms, and even maybe sometimes be disagreeable, then you don't have much to offer. That's what you and I are doing, and there are not many other people doing that.
Well, and I wish they would too, because people, people think of Methodism as just like your town's local gay church. The BML flag is on the outside. There's a rainbow flag, and you see them on the news here and there, and that's it. And they don't know that there are conservative Methodists still out there. And like Methodism, yes, it's fractured, but it's not dead. Like there's people like you and many others, who are still doing that. And I wish that Methodist podcasters, or just anybody like laity too, as well, just start a podcast and let people know and start engaging. That that way we can see, hey, Methodism is not that LGBT gay pastor who's just full on for 100% the liberal agenda and everything. And what's very revealing too is that this week, like I saw the General Conference on multiple news sources. Like Babylon Bee picked it up.
Oh, sure.
I don't know if you saw it.
Oh, yeah.
Where like I made the joke that the Methodists have chosen, I forget the terminology that they use, but they figured out that like Christianity isn't compatible with their religion or something like that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, they had a good one. I think it was from 4 years ago too, where some Africans decide they need to come to the United Methodist Church to evangelize us because we've lost the gospel, which is actually not much of a joke at all, much satire at all.
Yeah, it's funny because it's true, is what it is. And the Babylon Bee is all about that, just taking reality and just putting it in a way that makes you chuckle. But that's why it's funny, because it's completely and entirely true. Like they chose. I was looking at you shared Chris Ritter's overview of the General Conference,
right?
And what they changed. Do you want to give like a review for our audience? Like what really took place? Was it 2 weeks? Like over these last 2 weeks?
Yeah, for the United Methodist Church, the way that they govern, technically their highest government is a conciliar body. That means it's rules by council, and the General Conference is the council, and that's delegates from all over the world that assembled together for 2 weeks every 4 years. It's called a quadrennium, a 4-year period. And so they will go through more than 1,000 petitions in the first week in different legislative groups that review the legislation and decide whether they're going to recommend it or not. And then they'll have what are called plenary sessions where everybody is all together and they'll review the legislation that did pass legislative session. And they will pass a lot of things just in what's called a consent calendar, which is like an omnibus bill. And that's how a lot of things got in kind of under the radar. A lot of delegates didn't even understand a lot of what they were passing on the consent calendar. It's done in this very innocuous way at the beginning of the day. But then they'll have more controversial things that didn't pass legislative session by as wide a margin, and they will debate those on the floor of plenary. And they use Robert's Rules of Order, which is a kind of stilted Western white people cultural thing to do. And when you have a global body that doesn't speak English, all of them natively, then it becomes a very inaccessible way of doing business together for non-white, non-Western people. And so this is something that has resulted in Africans in particular, but also Filipinos and Eastern Europeans being pretty much disenfranchised from the process. And that is after at least 25% of the African delegation was disenfranchised from even being able to show up because they either didn't get visa invitation letters or they came too late. So what happened was this kind of false, fake global event that was really Western progressives taking over. It was a hostile takeover, and they moved the denomination far left, not just with respect to human sexuality, but with a great many issues, including abortion a little bit, but more the Israel-Palestine thing. They had all kinds of protests against Israel. They divested entirely from Israeli companies. And then they had several other stuff around environmentalism, fossil fuel, carbon footprint, social activism. They issued an apology to the people of Hawaii.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, they're big on, and it's, the Hawaiians were done wrong, but the Methodists didn't have hardly anything to do with it. So there's all kinds of virtue signaling, and they had big policy stuff. But from the get-go, people had to identify themselves whenever they spoke, not just by where they came from and whether they were lay or clergy, but they had to say their sex and their ethnicity or race, and they had to say their age group. And then a lot of people volunteered their pronouns and their disability status and who they were attracted to. They gave all kinds of identifiers. Some people were introducing their identifiers just for 30 seconds before they even spoke.
Remember that.
So there was ascendant leftism that was culturally dominant throughout the whole process, that the whole deck of cards was stacked in the favor of progressives. They were going to have their way this time.
It's funny. So somebody, recently said, I forget who, but like the church is like 5 years, like the church as in like the contemporary, American Christianity church, like not the true church, but like they're 5 years behind the culture. And if you watch the General Conference, they're more woke than CNN. Like just getting up there and just saying their, like you said, like their sexuality, their preferred pronouns, like CNN doesn't even go this hard.
Yeah.
But the General Conference was this like full throttle. Like every social issue that the left pushes, it was there. You can find it at the General Conference, and that's one of the things that just stood out to me.
And you also saw like an allergic reaction to the gospel. So whenever Africans in particular took the microphone, the temperature in the room went up. Presiding bishops, there were at least 3 presiding bishops that were openly hostile to African delegates getting up and saying, this goes against the Bible. One delegate, Jerry Kula from Liberia, lifted up a Bible. He's the one that you see the picture of lifting up his Bible.
Okay.
And he talked about what the Bible said. And the chair at that time was, what does that have to do with this? It was so grotesquely embarrassing for the United Methodist Church.
Why even at that point pretend to be a Christian? Honestly, like if you're that far, like what are they even doing? Because that's a lot of time and energy on their end. Like, why even do this, for crying out loud? Like, why not just abandon Christianity? Just make it easier for yourself. Just, instead of going through all these charades and loopholes.
Well, this is what cultural leftism has been doing in America for 100 years, more than, it started with liberalism and it's continued to go left, but it operates, its undergirding ideology is hatred of patriarchy, tradition, what came before, anything before now. This is what cultural revolutions all over the world have been doing for 150 years. And so it's undergirded by hatred of people like me and you. But what it does is it appropriates all of our language and redefines it. And then its goal becomes undercutting everything that was built up and then erecting something in its own image that has to continually reform itself all the time, because it's inwardly self-hating as well. So it's not sustainable. What's going to happen now is they've chased out people like me. There are some that are trapped, and the only way they can get out is if they leave all their stuff behind. And that's exactly what they're going to do. And then the denomination is going to continue to shrink and then live off of the liquidation of all these assets that they inherit from churches that actually believe the gospel and put their money where their mouth was, trusting in the institution. And now a lot of people are just learning that they can't trust institutions at all, which is really quite a sad lesson to learn.
Yeah. Before I ask you about the disaffiliation, I want to hear your thoughts on it, because apparently people were saying that they were making it super hard for the Africans to come in and be delegates, and there was a visa issue. Like, do you want to comment on that? Like, were they being difficult on purpose so that they wouldn't come be here at this conference?
Well, you can't speak to people's inner thoughts and motives and heart. What you can speak to is these people who were in charge of sending these visa letters. They've been in this job for a long time. They know how it works, and they actually had an additional 3 years more than usual, because the 2020 General Conference got moved back. Well, 4 years. I don't know why I said 3. They had all this time to figure these things out and do their job as they've always done it. And then the fact that they did it so abysmally on the first day of General Conference, they got up with a bunch of vague excuses. One delegate asked for a formal report that then it was like pulling teeth to get. And then even then, they didn't have any names, dates, specifics. They just alleged that these Africans just didn't do their paperwork correctly, and there was all kinds of corruption. The funny thing was, we do know about one bishop bringing his family from Africa to vote in the way that he wanted. And it was the liberal African bishop that's in charge of everything, Mande Muyombo. He brought his family and replaced actual elected delegates from North Katanga, which is in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so there was corruption on the progressive side that was used as an excuse not to send invitation. It just so happened that the African delegations that didn't get their visa invitation letters on time were from the most conservative areas that they knew were. So, I mean, hypothetically, it's possible that it was just, the luck of the draw mixed with incompetence, but, malice seems more likely. And then, this is something that people started tipping me off about in October of last year. I produced a short where I just said, hey, these guys aren't getting their visas on time. If they don't get them soon, a ton of them aren't going to be there. And everybody's like, no big deal. And it's exactly what happened. And even during General Conference, people went back to that video and mocked me. They're like, we've got Africans here. You're a conspiracy theorist. But it went exactly as I said it would.
That's kind of like when people go to vote, like during like presidential elections, and they're picking Donald Trump and they're saying the machine is going left. It's like, like you don't hear it, like it doesn't favor it never favors the conservative side. It always favors the left side. And like you said, like you can't say about their motives, but it's highly suspicious that would take place. Like these guys get in, but yet the guys that would be from the highly conservative area that they don't want, we know, they don't want them. That's the people that have trouble getting here. Like, what a coincidence.
Yeah. Yeah. And it starts making you crazy because it's built on things that you just can't prove. And all you've got is like a sense, and you can't be governed by a sense. You can't ask people to follow you and your view of seeing things because of a feeling that you have. So it's crazy making.
Yeah. So, let's talk about the disaffiliation. So basically, just for the audience, the GMC left at the time that they did because disaffiliation was closing. Is that correct?
Yeah, there was one provision for okay, so when it was passed in 2019, there was actually another provision for disaffiliation already. It's paragraph 2548.2.
Good memory.
Yeah. Well, I've reported on this stuff a lot. So, and it was a really great provision where you could just transfer the membership of a church to another evangelical denomination. It didn't have to be a big deal. But then they knew that they should pass. 2019, the traditionalists actually won, and it was a once and for all final showdown, or is supposed to be. And so they passed a piece of legislation that was paragraph 2553, where liberal congregations that didn't want to be part of a conservative denomination anymore could simply leave by paying unfunded pension liabilities and some residual costs. And it was supposed to be a very favorable, very charitable way out. They had no idea that the financial agency in charge would calculate unfunded pension liabilities so high. But what they didn't count on after that was the liberals and progressives just stayed. And they said, we're not going anywhere, and we're not doing what you guys agreed we should do. We're doing what we want. And then at that point, conservatives really had no means for chasing them out, removing them. And even if they did, the people in charge just don't have the heart for that sort of thing. It's so against the culture that they've been raised in Methodism that instead what they ended up doing was using that provision for liberal churches, because the Judicial Council, which is like the Supreme Court for the denomination, they said that other provision that was already there, you can't use it. We can only have one disaffiliation provision. They never explained why you can't have two. And so they were funneled into this very restrictive way. And then all the liberals in charge used it very uncharitably, such that in many places it was prohibitively expensive. They would charge you half the value of your building to get out, or they would make you take a series of votes that were all stilted. A lot of pastors refused to let churches even talk about it. A lot of superintendents refused churches even taking them. So there were all kinds of corrupt and malicious things along the way that resulted in, I still believe half the churches in the United Methodist Church would want to disaffiliate today if they could. But that provision where they could exit, paragraph 2553, it expired at the end of last year. That provision was never allowed in the central conferences. The one of the bishops, the head bishop at the time, Tom Bickerton, just said, Nope, it only applies to American conferences. And so they have a paragraph 572 now where an entire annual conference outside of the US can exit all at once, but it's like a 2 to 7 year period that it takes lots of different steps, a lot of collaborative effort, very, very laborious. And so they've effectively trapped, they've got a coalition of the unwilling, which is, I think, at least half the American denomination and probably 80% of the international United Methodist Church. So and as I said before, the whole strategy here is just to liquidate the assets that are going to have to be left behind for those who just can't stomach the denomination anymore.
That's interesting. So you think like if, based upon now, if they could disaffiliate, you think like what 50% would from the UMC
in America? Oh yeah,
really? So that, I mean, you know what, perfect segue to talk about this because you and I both had Redeemed Zoomer on our shows. We spent some time talking to him and everything. So, well, first of all, wouldn't that then mean that like 50% UMCs are still, if not conservative, they're at least moderates in
yeah,
this.
well, and I think I'm still being conservative when I say 50%. United Methodist News did a statistical study several years ago now showing that between conservative and moderate, those two groups represented like 70% of the American denomination. So very few United Methodist churches are actually on board with, BLM, rainbow flags, drag queen story hour, children's sermon, that far left, crazy, loony left type stuff. They're not on board with that. They don't want to be associated with that. So even if they're not particularly bothered by gay stuff, they also don't want to be known as let your freak flag fly church, so there are a lot that if there were no financial ramifications and they could get out with a pretty easy process, I think 50% or more want off this train ride. They are not interested in that.
So what do you think is going to happen now, with the UMC, before we talk about more about, Reconquista though, real quick, like, do you think that they got enough money now, it sounds like, to survive for like, what is it, like 2 generations, 1 generation? Because, they're dying. A lot of these churches are dying. Like I went to 2 Methodist churches in my town. They have like 15, 20 people there, and they're older people, like they're not families. So it's like, okay, they're not reproducing, especially if you bring in, as I said too, if you bring in LGBT people, well, that just collapse in on themselves because, they can't procreate. Like, they can adopt, but that's the exception, not the rule. So it's, like I would predict that churches that just have, again, like 15, 20 members, they're going to die within 1 generation. It's almost like they just injected themselves with poison. Like, would you agree with that? Or do you have a different prediction?
Well, I mean, so when we're talking about why liberal churches die, I mean, there is real statistical evidence showing that if you're not procreating and producing children in the movement, I mean, that's just the biggest indicator of whether or not your movement is going to live or die. But I think it's more fundamentally about, okay, what's at stake if you guys. So with conservatives, we're offering salvation to people who are on an assembly line into hell. Like we're literally saving them. We've got the cure for cancer, and they got cancer. With liberals, not much is at stake. Everybody's going to heaven or whatever. We're going to the same place when it's over. It's really of no circumstance whether or not you receive Christ Jesus or you're a Methodist or, even if you're on the wrong side of history, we're still going to the same place. So that's what is fundamentally just like problematic about leftist religion is it's optional and it's not very compelling, and nobody finds it worth participating in other than people in just a very synthetic, materially rich society where we're just surrounded by phoniness and don't even know what real looks like. It's just not going to take root in the developing world. You'll find exceptions to people who believe it in the developing world, but they're usually very educated and Western inculcated. So it's just not, it's not an ideology that does well outside of, it's not like America's fertile. It's just like, it's so synthetic that only synthetic things really happen here. But you'll notice they always take root in a conservative place and then they just degrade it until they take it over. But there's never like a flourishing of leftism there afterwards. It's just, they go and they infect somewhere else and take that over. So they've received the assets now. They have unrestricted assets enough to get by for 5 years if they took in not a dime. And then when you're talking about restricted assets that can be redesignated, when you're talking about real estate that can be liquidated and sold, that they can get by for, I mean, it just depends on how they work their money. I mean, they've got investments paying off, and that's, people are going to continue to give for some time. So it's hard to say when the money's going to run out, how much they're going to be able to grab and liquidate. All of that is besides the point. I don't know. They're not going to, I mean, unless something really crazy happens. I don't have a crystal ball, but I just don't see how they could possibly grow, how they could possibly be financially sustainable. I just think they're going to have the Sears Roebuck model now, where they start closing down all their branches and living off the money that they get from that.
So, yeah, I mean, so it sounds like maybe and hopefully one generation that these churches just die out, and honestly, the sooner the better, because if they're just this far gone, it's and just fully all about this liberal agenda. Hopefully, the sooner the better. Then the conservative UMCers, or at least the moderates, they can become more conservative. That they just take over if we get lucky.
Yeah, it's so it depends on. I think the thing that it really depends on, because right now their business model is dependent on infiltration and corruption, and then taking things over. So unless conservatives learn how to defend against them, I think. So I don't think there's like, there's only United Methodist liberals, and once they die out, the problem's over. It's like, no. There's just liberalism, and then you have this long march through the institutions where it doesn't matter what name is on the sign outside. They're going to infiltrate wherever there is an institution, and until institutions learn to defend themselves, you're going to see this long march continue through these institutions where they compel the rest of us to be on the right side of history with them. So I'm not as optimistic about, this thing will run its course and then all that's left is conservatives. I think that there are spiritual forces at work that are going to continue to declare this spiritual warfare on the church and institutions more broadly. And if the church has not learned to defend itself, then we're looking at a prolonged, what I would consider a satanic effort to break down the church. And you're going to see this pattern that Ackerman, Redeemed Zoomer, just says is not good, where we continue to abandon institutions that we build and build new institutions, and eventually have no institutions because everybody is so demoralized that we don't even try.
Do you agree then, at least with the principle, as Redeemed Zoomer and whole Reconquista, and just for the audience, in case you don't know, Reconquista, Spanish word to reconquer, it's about taking back the mainline denominations from the liberals, and you do that by going to moderate one, staying there long term, and hopefully within a generation or X amount of time, it becomes a conservative one. So that's it in a nutshell. So do you agree then, at least in some principles now, like kind of like hindsight 2020, like maybe the GMC should have stayed?
I mean, it's hard to say. Especially at this point. So like Ackerman really went on the warpath whenever the United Methodist Church finally changed its sexual ethics, and he wrote some mad tweets.
Yeah, I saw them.
Yeah, and which offended a lot of conservatives that left. Some I saw that there was constructive engagement from John Lomperis and I think Mark Tooley, who just said, "Look, it was gone before this." Like when you look at who was what bishops were put in at jurisdictional conference, when you look at the candidates that were put in, this was all over before the GMC even broke away. And that, I think that's probably right. I think that's true. I think the writing was on the wall. I think the high ground was taken firmly 10 years ago. And that they tried to create the image of what's it called? Manufactured consent. I think they tried to do that at the last couple general conferences, couldn't quite do it. And then this time it was just so overtly corrupt. That was the only way that they could do it, was to coerce these delegates abroad. So, I think that Reconquista is right in its demographic trends that it shows. And I think it is right that you can fight off liberalism in mainline denominationalism. I think the place where Ackerman could be wrong, and I do honestly, I guess I do think he is wrong, is I don't think young people have the staying power. He's an exceptional person. I don't know if he understands how exceptional he is against the rest of his generation.
Yeah.
I don't think, to his mind, what is going to be required in the United Methodist Church, and probably pretty soon in the PCUSA after this next general convention they have, is having moles, pretty much conservative moles in liberal congregations that take the power there and that eventually climb the ladder. And I just don't think you're going to have young people with the staying power to do that for 10, 20, 30 years before they can take back over. And I don't think that's even spiritually healthy to ask people to do. I really appreciate his looking at Athanasius and the way that he was able to do it. But I don't think you can expect young people on the grassroots level to have the integrity of an Athanasius. So I think that there was a time when the main line could have been reclaimed and you could have pushed liberals out. But I think that was like the 1980s and 1990s, to be honest with you. I think that was before I even entered the ministry. And I've been frustrated for many years in ministry that conservatives didn't push back more, but it's just there were all kinds of cultural things at play that just made certain approaches to doing spiritual warfare within the church so unpalatable as to be unconsiderable. And that's what really doomed us was conservatives forgot how to fight a long time ago.
Yeah, definitely that. Well, so I want to hear your thoughts on this now, because something that Redeem Zoomer really, I think, argues well with the global Methodist movement, and I can't help but agree with him. And so I want to hear your thoughts. Is that he argues that in 2019 they won the vote on homosexuality, and then what happened was, instead of the liberals disaffiliating, they said, no, we're going to stay, we don't care. Mm-hmm. And so he argues that if the GMCers did the same thing, just has the same kind of tenacity, we don't care, we're going to bunker down and play the long game. And then 2024 comes, if those same people were there, they could have just voted again and then won the vote. And when you present it like that, 2019 is 5 years, only 5 years ago. So it's like, oh, it was that recent. They won that vote. Which, by the way, let me say too, is that the GMC or Methodism often gets accused of being like that gay mainline, denomination, but actually they were firmer longer on homosexuality or against it than like the Presbyterian Church of America.
Right. Yeah.
So, I just wanted to throw that in, because the Presbyterian Church voted on this 2012 to allow gay clergy. So, for me, like that's a win that the Methodists did better in that regard. But anyway, it seems like, okay, yeah, if the GMCers didn't leave and they were here at this conference, do you think, like, objectively, they could have voted against this, or do you think it was too late even then?
Yeah, the delegation would have been too slanted anyway. Because here's the thing, liberals and conservatives have different values and they behave differently on an institutional level. So liberals are obsessed with claiming the high ground, whereas conservatives are much more concerned about making disciples on the local level. And that results in liberals claiming the high ground. And that's what happened in the UMC. And that's what happened with our delegates. And so maybe the ratio would have been a little bit different at General Conference had all the conservatives stayed. But these things would have passed, even if there were a 10% margin difference, these legislative efforts would have passed anyway. If you saw the margins by which they passed this time, we're talking 80, 90% margins. So I don't think that that's realistic. Moreover, you have to have the means to remove your opponents and delegitimate them. And conservatives, I have a series on my channel. If anybody wants it, it's called Bitter Medicine. I did like 4 or 5 segments just talking about how it is that conservatives didn't have the staying power, the resolve, the integrity to do the combat that needed to get done. And there is such a thing as too little, too late. I think that might be where I divide from Ackerman on, is there is a point at which defeat is inevitable. And at that point, you either have a Benedict option or you have a Boniface option. I don't look down on those the way that Ackerman does. But I do think there's a point where it's too little, too late. That's being put to the test, and I very much appreciate Ackerman's leading the charge and pushing as strong and as firm as I think you need somebody like that. So I don't want to disparage or talk him down at all, but I've done the calculus different than him.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a conversation worth having, and even if maybe somebody doesn't agree with Reconquista in theory, because I've been thinking about this too. Like, is there a shot to take the UMC? Like, should we go bunker down for like the long haul? At least, the very least, whether we side with or against that, I think the principles that he highlights, and you kind of like alluded to them, like conservatives aren't, I forget the language you use, but basically like, tenacious enough to just bunker down and be confrontational. They're too afraid. And the big word that sticks out to me is, retreatism. And I wish that conservatives would stop retreating and just put up a fight. At least give me a fight before you retreat. Like, say, okay, you are going to retreat, but at least make sure you get there where it's absolutely clear that you needed to retreat, rather than just, oh, we were going to, lose anyway, so let's just leave now, without even trying, to win. And I think if you look at, the liberals, like, the long march through the institutions, that works both ways. And we know it works because it works for them. And it's really bugging me now how conservatives, that, we don't have the same kind of mindset.
Well, I don't think it's an equal and opposite proposition. I don't think that if conservatives do the same thing that liberals do, that it works. Because what the liberals do is they interrupt the integrity of what liberals do is they interrupt the integrity of conservatives. If conservatives return the favor, liberalism isn't hurt at all, because they don't have to have a consistent inner motivator. They're entirely inconsistent. They're not at all harmed by the integrity of their theology being mocked or scoffed at. They're not vulnerable in the same way that conservatives are. So I think that unless you have means of removing people from your covenant body against their will, that you have no prayer, you have no chance.
Yeah.
And so that's what my biggest thing that I push most consistently on my channel has been, is we need a fast, easy, concise way to remove people from local churches against their will, and local churches away from the global Methodist Church against their will. If you don't have that, even if you have a means of doing that, but it's real like arduous and there are several steps you have to do, that's going to destroy an institution. So you need very concise leadership that can remove cancerous elements, because if you don't, you cannot infect them in the opposite way and like make them more conservative. What liberalism is, it undercuts and degrades, and you can't like undercut liberalism and make people more conservative. Once they've accepted the presuppositions there, they are gone. You're not getting them back. They're not persuadable. They're not open to you. All they're wanting to do is undercut you. So I think that is a fundamental misunderstanding of how ideology works. And I mean, we're putting it to the test, but I don't think it's an equal and opposite proposition.
Well, you know what? That's a great point, because I've been thinking about also the Young Methodists for Tradition movement, and which is an offshoot of Reconquista in the Methodism camp. And one of the things I realize, I'm really happy for them, by the way, that that they're doing this.
Yeah.
But one of the things I realize is, because somebody commented, I'm not going to say his name, I probably don't even remember his name anyway, but he commented on how, let politics be politics. Because, I was asking, okay, so what's the plan now with, the General Conference? And he responded, pretty well, but he said, let politics be politics. This is going to be one on a local level. Let's just be faithful, keep being involved in our church, going to church, and, doing, like the general means of grace, and, and so on and so forth. But then I thought, started to think about that, that's good advice, but, and maybe, you agree with me, there needs to be a political engagement. So we can't just say, I'll just go as a layman and be here long term. These laymen have to, there's that thumbs up, by the way, but these laymen have to go and get into the politics side of this. And conservatives tend to not like politics, because there's this thinking in Christianity where politics is bad. That's anti-Christian. Jesus didn't care about politics. Jesus' lordship kind of stopped short of politics. And we just got to worry about saving souls and let, that spear be, and, don't even touch it with a 10-foot pole. But if you look at what the liberals did, and maybe, you were kind of alluding to this, they have the means to get people out of office, and the means, it seems like in this case, to stop even certain delegates from coming over and voting and being a part of it. And also flipping that to letting certain delegates possibly come in. So if we just stay in the layman side without trying to get into the the political aspect side, I don't think that's a very good strategy. I think we need to do both. We need laymen, and also these laymen need to go in and try to be, get on, the delegate side, being pastors and, lay leaders and whatnot, where they can have these political authority to remove certain people that need to be removed, and at least have a say that would be higher above those people that can just, kind of like, at the General Conference, hold a Bible up, and that person sitting there and basically just canceling him because he has the power. Because somebody has the power to do so, and if we can get the right people in those seats, and I think that's going to help this movement, and I think you need that in this movement.
So if you don't have, when you're looking at group dynamics, one saying in our language that's been around for a long time is one rotten apple ruins a whole bunch, right?
Yeah.
And that's the nature of groups. And I've written about this a good deal on my Substack. Is just in the local church, it has this impact, but also in conciliar bodies. If you allow even a couple people that just shoot things down, or they gum up the works, they have a nasty influence on the group that ruins, and nobody wants to be a part of such a group, except for the more despicable members of the body who have it in them to participate in this kind of dishonesty and maneuvering. So I don't think it's nearly as important to have the right people step up to lead as it is to get the wrong people out of leadership. I think if you just focus on getting the wrong people, the people who love using policy and procedure against the body, the people who love elevating themselves and disenfranchising others, the people who love passing all these resolutions, even though their church is dying back home, get them out, get all of them out. And then you can maybe have some crummy people who just love Jesus really well running things, and that's going to be okay. I think the culture matters a lot more than what's on paper. And so everybody fights about what's in the Book of Discipline or what's in the Book of Resolutions. Truth is that the United Methodist Church has been a miserable institution for at least 20 years because we had the right stuff on paper. Book of Discipline was great before now, but the quality of the connection, the culture between them was just nasty for so long because they didn't have the integrity to kick nasty people out.
Yeah, what a shame. So, what do you think is the way forward for Methodists? Like, what should they take? Because I saw somebody on Twitter saying, I forget his name, but he's a faithful Methodist as well. Shane, I think I want to say. And
there is a faithful Shane, of course.
Yeah, Shane.
His last name either.
Yeah, but he's been tweeting, get out of the get out of the UMC, come to the GMC. What do you think is the answer now, or what should Methodists do going forward?
Like people within the United Methodist Church?
Yeah. Or even without the Methodist Church, because also there's that aspect where people left the UMC and they just gone non-denominational, but they haven't even joined the GMC.
Yeah, I think that the non-denominational, first off, at a certain point, the word Methodist starts to lose its value. And I would say that once you just leave the notion of a denomination, an extended covenant body, once you leave that behind, I just don't think you can claim to be Methodist. And I think that there are a lot of local church communities that are so burned by the United Methodist Church that they don't want anything to do with Methodism and they don't want anything to do with denominations at all. And I think that Satan is glorified in that. Even though there's some wonderful people that I love within non-denominational churches or independent churches, I still just think that Satan is so happy that people are turned off to denominations now. Within the United Methodist Church, I've had people write me and say, what should I do? And I just say, if you can stomach gay clergy and gay marriages being done and you're not really bothered by all this, then stay. Please stay. Give the United Methodist Church its best shot at making its case, because I can guarantee you if they don't do well, they're going to say it's because all these conservatives were telling them all to leave. If you would be happy in the United Methodist Church, please stay. And let me be very clear. We don't want you in the Global Methodist Church. Please do not come to the Global Methodist Church. Global we need discerning people who understand God's word is what it is. So if someone's not bothered by those things, it's because they have a fundamental misunderstanding of who God is, the nature of his word. We don't need that confusion in the Global Methodist Church. Stay where you are. Don't bring that infection over here. Now, if you are bothered by it and you understand it for the evil that it is, then consider coming Global Methodist. But again, I'm very concerned about people who are more concerned with being nice than they are faithful. I really want to put out a clarion call to people who want to be faithful more than being nice to come to the Global Methodist Church, because that's what we need. We need a covenant body that has the integrity to protect itself. There are a lot of people that really, that's not their project. And I mean, I'm not the king of the Global Methodists. I can't decide who comes in and who goes. I'm just one voice, but that's what I want. But there are a lot of other faithful Wesleyan bodies that you can join and that are eager to have you. I know that the Free Methodist Church has gotten several. There's a new group starting off, the Methodist Collegiate Churches, that apparently has been working with like 100 churches in Kenya. I got a guy writing me about them. You got the Nazarenes, you got the Salvation Army, you got Evangelical Methodist Church, you got the Congregational Methodist Church. I interviewed reps from a lot of these. There are a lot of faithful places you can go, but the question is, how much is it going to cost you? And everybody's going to have to make that decision at a certain point. I mean, try and work with the bishop you got, the conference you've got, but if they're clear that you can't get out with your assets in tow, then you've got to decide what's more important to you. Is it the assets that have been entrusted to you, or is it the faith of Jesus Christ? There is going to be a decision point for a lot of people. And a lot of people have already made that decision. They've been making that decision for decades. Conservatives have been voting with their feet and leaving for decades. United Methodist Church hasn't grown a single year from the day that it was brought to be in 1968. It's been in constant decline because liberalism degrades things, and a lot of people have the good sense to leave.
Some of those churches that you listed off, like Free Methodist in northern New Jersey, I can't, to my knowledge on Google search, I can't find any. So, so I think those are more out west and down south and everything. Over here,
in the Northeast where you are,
UMCs, and now we have like when I go on a Global Methodist Northeast, find a church. There's like 3 within my vicinity. One is within 15-20 minutes of me, which I went to today, as I told you about. And they're a Korean, church.
Yeah.
Seems like all the white ones are just liberal. And I think I found 2 conservative or GMC churches, and they're both Korean churches, but they do have an English service.
Well, and I'm thinking the Wesleyan Church has a presence in the Northeast. Have you looked around at them? I
got to look again. I don't think I found one local where I live. I got to look.
I could be wrong, but I'm inclined to think there are some more evangelically, traditionally minded Methodist Wesleyan denominations that operate up there, but I don't know your region at all.
Yeah, that I should check out again. But I'm pretty sure there's not too many local. Are you what? How is the GMC doing right now? By the way, is it doing better? Like, has it grown? Because last year I interviewed you, it was up I think like 3,000 churches so far, which is bigger than the Presbyterian Church. Has it grown since?
Yeah, it's constantly growing. It's gonna grow. I mean, indefinitely, really. I mean, it depends on how they do things. They're huge on church growth. They're making it part of the culture, just growth. And so mine has been one of the voices cautioning, like, let's make sure that we're maintaining doctrinal fidelity while we're ushering all these people in, because right now we're spread pretty thin. It's been a huge growth, and most of it's come, of course, from the United Methodist Church. But there are a lot of other Methodist denominations that are looking at combining with us. We've already gotten a bishop come over from the Evangelical Methodist Church.
I heard about that.
Yeah. So they're really trying to be kind of a pan Methodist denomination, and I think a lot of Methodist denominations are interested in that. So, and not just in the West, but in Africa, there are dozens of Wesleyan denominations, in Asia as well. I had no idea how many there were, and I still probably don't have a proper idea. But it's going to be growing primarily by people in other organizations wanting to join up. They also have talked about church planting. They partner with Leadership Institute, Leadership Institute. I forget what they're called, but they train clergy and laity to plant churches, and they're really hoping to do a lot of that in the coming years. The problem is Global Methodist Church doesn't tax nearly as much as the United Methodist Church does, so they're not going to have as much money to throw at church plants. But I think a lot of that's going to get worked out over the coming years.
Before the show, we talked about, something about church planting. Do you want to comment on that? I forget what you said, but something along the lines of like, because I was asking you in relation to a global Methodist church, something, if you help me recall, something about you think we should probably look to plant more churches. Like, is that still your
Well, so I think
thought?
that we Westerners have a way of being so dependent on money and structure that we like cut ourselves off unnecessarily. When you look at the history of the Christian church, you haven't had these mission societies or these evangelical societies that undergirded these church plants. Rather, you just had faithful people from within a movement have to go to another place for one reason or another, start fellowshipping with their neighbors, and then it just naturally comes about. The faith is something that when you don't mess with it, naturally grows. Like that is in its DNA. So you just have to learn to let it be what it is. If you have to throw a bunch of money at it for it to grow, then that's an artificial growth, and maybe something real will get planted on down the line. And I think, that is the hope, after 3 years, we will be financially sustainable or whatever. But the problem with growing it, a church is not grown with money. A church is grown with faithful disciples. And until we get clear about that, we're going to have a bunch of very consumer-based churches because the backbone is money, not disciples. So I think there should be a reclaiming of, Methodism grew long before there was like an evangelical push.
It wasn't even a denomination, too, for many, most of John Wesley's life. It wasn't even a denomination.
Right.
It was just the people, which is
they
the
just knew how
part.
to grow. They just knew how to talk about their faith and call Bible studies together in their home and start class meetings. That's how it's supposed to begin. It's not supposed to begin with training these people and seeding these churches and getting all this funding together and having coaching. Like all that is artificial new stuff that supplements what is lacking, which is a living faith that naturally reproduces.
Yeah, definitely. What are your any concerns, for GMC, that you think? Because we talked about it too, but I just wish that the GMC would be on the guard to not make some same mistakes as it did before. Because one of the fears that I have is that, okay, the GMC, if you separate it once, you'll do it again, and I don't want them to see that maybe 50 years from now the GMC is going through another disaffiliation now because liberals infiltrated. Because liberals, once they figured it out, that, okay, the UMC is kind of dying. Like, let's just plant some people in this GMC and do the same thing. And I just wish, that the GMC would be on the guard and look out for that. And I can't help but see a little bit of laxity, if that's the right word I use, laxity, with certain people where it's almost like we can sip our coffee and have a nice little chat about how we want to, go forward in Methodism, where it's kind of like, okay, maybe we need to, instead of sipping our coffee, we need to kind of like group together and make sure that this doesn't happen again and get, a little bit more stern and stronger in our doctrine and make sure that we don't retreat and we put up more of a fight. Like, would you agree with me on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm obviously, and it's not that the GMC isn't full of wonderful people, but, I got to reference my Bitter Medicine series again. I've said all along, the GMC is made up of people from the UMC. And unless they assess the situation and figure out what went wrong, they're pretty much doomed to do again what they did before.
Yes.
And it's very common sense. Like, if you've been making a mistake, you need to assess where the mistake was. Otherwise, you're going to keep making the mistake. And I think a lot of people are participating in this. I would call it like a fantasy where we got away from the bad people. Now we have the Holy Spirit. Look at how exuberantly we worship. The Holy Spirit's with us. Nothing bad can happen to us. And I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding of how the Holy Spirit works and how Satan works. I think we imagine that the more spirit-filled we are, the more Satan just can't touch us. And the reality is that the closer you draw to Christ, the more Satan is gunning for you. The more you need spiritual armament, the more vigilant you need to be. So it's just, I think that they are largely theologically flawed. I don't think that's a uniform thing. I think some leadership is more sober than other leadership. But I'm not even concerned with the leadership. I'm much more concerned about the culture. So I'm trying to engage on the grassroots level, the culture level, so that whenever the leadership is not strong enough, the people are. That's what's needed is, we need a culture that is intolerant of faithlessness so that even whenever the leadership is tolerant, the people at the bottom are just saying, well, we need new leadership then, because we need someone who will fight the wolves away. And this guy, he doesn't have a backbone. We can't have him leading anymore. And it does. You can have the best leaders in the world, but if you don't have good laity, you're not going to do anything. So I think we're probably wrong to focus at the top level, and we need to focus much more on recreating a sense of Methodist identity and fidelity, and even a warrior-like spirit.
Yes, amen. Yeah, I don't have the full quote in front of me, but like John Wesley talked about how the people would just be a dead sect if they don't hold fast to the doctrine, spirit, and discipline. And that's true. And doctrines are part of that. So, a lot of people would think, oh, it's just the experience. Let me just live out my faith. Yes, live out your faith, but that comes from right doctrine.
Absolutely.
And we need all of those. And if we can be firm on those, like I think of Titus 1:9, one of the qualifications for a pastor is that he can refute those who contradict.
Yes.
Pastors don't just, tend to the flock. They also protect the flock from the wolves. So it means you got to be caring and fighting against the wolves, and we need to do both. And everybody's dealing with this, honestly. The same kind of situations, like too many weak pastors and even weak laymen and clergymen. So everybody's dealing with this, but Methodism as well has to be at least aware of this and start making these corrections.
Let me plug. I have a Substack, jeffreyrickman.substack.com. I've recently begun a series on 12 essential characteristics of Methodism that we need to reclaim.
Awesome.
And the very first one that I published yesterday was on how Methodism is concerned with what is primitive, what we've done from the beginning, and what is universal, what all Christians believe. So doctrine figures very heavily into that. And there are a lot of people that have learned that Methodism is more about chasing a feeling than it is about having right doctrine. And it is true that John Wesley spoke against a dead orthodoxy, but what a proper understanding of doctrine is that when you believe rightly, you also live rightly. Orthopraxis, living rightly, proceeds out of orthodoxy, which is right belief. And Amen. Methodists would do very well to receive. I'm not the only one cautioning this. There are a lot of very faithful Methodist speakers and leaders cautioning this, but I think you should listen to me. So
yeah, definitely, man. And I do want to commend you too, because like you are a true Methodist podcaster, and so we need more, men like you and everything. And you do have a great podcast, and you're growing too. Like I see,
thanks,
you're growing.
Yeah. Like you're bigger than I am on YouTube. I still haven't figured out how you did that, but I'm doing okay.
Well, you're better than I am.
I don't know about that, but I appreciate your kind words, brother. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll include your link, in the description and everything. It's almost an hour because I know it's a Sunday night while we're recording, so we got our families to go to. So the viewers, thank you for watching, tuning in. Please like this video, share, subscribe, do the same for his channel as well, and help get the word out. And if you're a Methodist, hopefully put these things into practice. And also, if you're thinking about starting a podcast. Start a podcast, as we talked about in the beginning, we need more Methodist podcasters, not just so much infighting, but also going out there evangelizing, letting people know we're not dead. Methodism, it's not dead. It's not that gay pride flag in your local town and Black Lives Matter. That's not Methodism. Never was and never will be by God, God's grace. Do you want to add any final words?
I just think so. Whenever for someone, I hope someone didn't get to the end of this and go, they're anti-gay and anti-Black. That is not the thing about Methodism. Methodists love people enough to warn people about their sin. And so people who are enslaved to sexual desire in many forms need to come to get right with Jesus. And I hope they entertain Methodism as an option for that, because we talk a lot about God's power and grace and love, and that's needed to come out of that wrong kind of love. You need right love. And the other thing with the race, with BLM, the problem with them is not that we are against Black people and we think Black people don't matter. It's more that sorry, my little girl needs to go potty. I will be right back. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Hey guys, sorry. We just had to make a quick edit. His kids were calling on him, but continue.
So with the BLM stuff, the problem is not that we don't care about non-white people. Methodism should not be synonymous with white people at all. It's to do with neo-Marxist ways of dealing with race and redistribution, and BLM is a Marxist institution that's against the family and seeking to undo Western society. That's the thing that's wrong with it. But we very much want Methodism to be intercultural, interracial, a mixing of all people, because we believe that's what the kingdom of heaven is going to be like. So let's just be clear. We're conservative, but we're not that stereotype of hateful, white, racist conservative. We're ones that love tradition. We love Christian history. We love Christian doctrine. And we think it's for all people because God's grace is for all people.
And that's true love too. So it's not about we don't love them. We love them, and that's why we tell them and point them and call them to Jesus Christ. And that's truly loving your neighbor. So, well said, plainly spoken, as your podcast says.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again, for joining, guys, and take care and God bless. We'll see you around next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.